Okay, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We'll go ahead and get started right now. Some people will continue to log in. If you do have any technical issues, feel free to type it into the chat box, and it will get resolved. My name is Peter Smith, and I lead the business development efforts for Volantic, an Oracle Primavera partner. And presenting with us today also will be Tom Cutting, who leads our implementation practice. And the subject for today is going to be managing IT projects with Oracle Primavera. So a little bit about Volantic to start off. We are an Oracle Platinum partner. We specialize in implementation and consulting services for Oracle Primavera, as well as Oracle Business Intelligence and Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition. We've been around for about 6 or 7 years, and we've got involved with a number of IT implementations regarding Primavera. So everyone from this webinar will also receive a white paper. So everyone who's registered will be emailed a PDF white paper, a strategy for governing IT projects, programs, and portfolios throughout the enterprise. So not only will you get to see a presentation here, but you get to leave with some concrete facts, about a 6-page paper of recommendations for governing IT projects within here. So back to the topic of today, which is the IT project management. And this first slide you see here, I've referenced a very popular book on IT project management, appropriately titled Death March. And although it's a strong title, the book goes into and explains a lot of the challenges that IT departments have with project management and how often the market demands or the internal demands will put such a difficult bind on the IT department to produce work with short amount of time and resources that what could have been a simple project ends up really restraining the resources and turning into a death march. Now, the book goes on to explain several techniques, and if you are in IT project management, I do recommend reading it. Part of the reason I brought it up is to really kind of put emphasis on how challenging IT projects can be for organizations. In fact, according to the Boston-based Standish Group, only 30% of IT projects succeed, meaning they complete within schedule, costs, and meet requirements. So with that number, 70% fail, there certainly is a need for better controls and better project management over IT projects. And really what the goal for this webinar is for us to communicate to you our knowledge and what we've seen for IT project management and how we've seen kind of this story play out. I really would like people, whether they are consultants or whether they work within an organization, to be able to take away from this webinar how to really go through this process and how to keep successful with not only the developing the requirements and the needs, but going through the software selection process and going through the implementation process to make sure that this thing works out for your company. And we're going to do it a little bit different. This isn't going to be your usual webinar where it's going to be, now it's not going to be bullet point after bullet point of rhetoric. I don't want to do that because I don't want to put everyone in this webinar to sleep. Instead, we're going to put it in a story form. And we're going to tell a story of an IT company going through changes and how the department, from the beginning of the story of going through their needs and their pains to the software, all the way through to the implementation part of it. And this is a story that really applies to a number of different industries. So some of you on the phone might be with a technology company who really uses your project management techniques to produce a product to go out to market. And these principles, these techniques we share with you, and this story we share with you will be very relevant. There might be some people on the phone who belong with a utility company or an oil and gas company or some kind of asset-intensive company where Primavera might be used in your operations currently, but not in your IT organization. And the IT organization struggles with keeping up with the internal demand of a lot of the projects. There also might be some of you with healthcare who might be in the IT side of it, might be in the facility side of it, using Primavera for project management. And, you know, what we've seen is that a lot of the same techniques, we've not only seen it throughout these industries, but we've seen it with our own clients as well. such as City of Hope, which is a healthcare facility, or Broadcom, which is a technology company, or Molina Healthcare, which is another healthcare provider. So instead of giving just one specific example and airing a lot of facts about one, we decided to generalize it into one fictitious story and then cite specific facts throughout the story about examples. So the story we're telling today is going to be about Bob Johnson, who is an IT director for this fictitious company, XYZ Inc. We're going to cite some real facts throughout this story. And like any story, it's a three-part story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in this case, the beginning is the needs. What are their pains that they're going through and how Bob experiencing that. And then it moves through how they select a software solution for that. And then the story continues with how they implement it and become successful with that. So the beginning of the story, Bob's in pain. He's got needs. He's a director of IT, and he's got three categories of needs. He's got a need for planning his IT projects. He's got a need for executing them. And he's got a need for communicating them. To be more specific with the planning category, he's got to manage the demand. Not only some of the internal demand to do projects like upgrade applications, take on new software, backups, migrations, and so on, but also some external need for developing products or so on. And he's got a whole lot of pressure from his operations side, from his marketing side, to get these projects out. And he doesn't really have a good way to plan them out and select which projects are the most important. On top of that, Bob manages 300 different applications within his organization. So there's a strong need for application management. He's got all these applications. Many of them are redundant and so on. And he doesn't have a good visibility across his portfolio of managing them. On top of the planning, he's got to be able to execute on his projects. And to execute on them means delivering his projects on time. Not only being able to manage his resources for the projects, so he's proactively allocating the correct resources, and he's not driving a death march throughout there. And not only does he have to balance out his resources, but he's got to be able to utilize their input. And he's got to be able to have an easy way for people to input and update the project information. People who might not be schedulers and might not be experts of the software, but to be able to put in their information. In addition to that, there's also some integration needs. He's got all these applications, many of which need to be integrated, which can be very intense projects for internal IT departments to take on. And the last category, he needs to be able to communicate, which is establish some dashboards, share and collaborate information throughout there. Currently, he's using Excel reports, which is one thing which we see very common when we go into organizations. We say, can we take a look at your reports? And they show us one of the more elaborate Excel spreadsheets I've ever come across, with workbook after workbook after formula of a lot of manually entered in data. And the conversation always goes the same. We say, well, what's the issue? They say it takes forever to develop, and it's not right. So he needs to be able to somehow automate his reporting practice and make it more accurate. So Bob's gone through, he's experienced these pains that XYZ Inc. has, and he's developed kind of a needs list, and he puts it out to RFP. He makes this list of requirements. He goes out for software companies, and he looks, and he scores each of these requirements. And from the demonstrations through the whole sales process, he ends up selecting Oracle Primavera to take on for project and portfolio management. Now to get into a little more specific of how they line them up. To meet up for his planning needs, he selects a portfolio management solution. For his execution needs, he selects the enterprise portfolio project management solution. And for his communication needs, he selects Oracle's business intelligence. All these solutions integrate and work together as one to address specifically what he was looking to do. And let's take a look exactly of how these applications meet up to those areas. So on to his planning needs about managing demand. He has this application where he's got the ability for his team members to put in information into the forms section. So whenever a potential project or a demand for a project comes in, the team can enter information into the forms part here and enter in just some key information with it, whether it be a financial summary or the strategy or the risk components to it. Capture a lot of this demand coming in and then be able to evaluate which project moves forward. So from here, this information then gets pushed into a graph like here, which is an investment chart. And this investment chart allows you to display three kind of levels of information: an x-axis, a y-axis, and then the size of the bubbles, each bubble representing a certain project. A lot of the time, the size of the bubbles might be the budget or so on. So he can take a look at all this demand he's captured through the forms and all the projects throughout his enterprise or his applications throughout his enterprise, and he can do what-if scenario planning, where if a project has a high risk and low return on investment, he can choose to delete those projects and then look at his portfolio from another view. So he can really choose the right demand and rich projects to move forward with. And then once that is kind of established, which are the correct projects, you can use the portfolio management application. He's got a workflow set up within here to establish governance and some standardization. So whenever a project gets selection, it goes through the appropriate approval routes to get pushed on, moving him now to the execute phase of the project, where he can set up a schedule. And this is what they really like. This is some of the really powerful features that appeal to them with the Oracle Primavera P6. The screenshot I have shown here is an example of one specific project of a simple schedule where you've got some of the milestone activities on top and then the WVS and activities below. For those of you on this webinar who are familiar with Primavera P6 or scheduling software, this is probably a very familiar screen. And part of the benefits of some of these newer releases of P6 is the ability to take this project, capture it in a template, and be able to easily recreate it in your execute phase, not to enter in a lot of data after data after data. So they're going to meet up to their execution needs by having these templates like this for their projects. They come in here, they have each activity, and then they assign a resource, meaning a person, a programmer, an IT manager for each task and each resource. And then they have resource management, not only for this specific project, but for all the projects across their enterprise. So now there's an enterprise IT. They've got the ability to look at kind of the demand of their resources, their open resources, and their team summary. On top of that, to collect resource data, or look at it more specifically, they can look at it at a more individual level, where XYZ can take a look at which resources are over allocated with which limit lines. Not only can look at it from this view, from a histogram, but with P6, they can look at it on an individual view, where each resource is grouped right here with all the tasks assigned under them, and you can easily make corrections here to over allocation and have visibility into all your resources tasks. This is great tools for their project managers to use, but that need that Bob had before about being able to easily collect team input, well, they're going to do that with P6 Team Member, which is a lightweight web interface, which is also available on an iPad for the team members to come in here and update the status of their project, how much time they spent on it, maybe percent complete, any remaining duration of their project. So there is a really easy way for them to come in and get this information captured within here. For the communication part of it, they looked at the customizable dashboards and the ability to have that visibility across their enterprise. And here's some examples of the early stage projects behind schedule and some of the customizable dashboards that they will have. Not only will they have this, but they'll be able to drill into these dashboards down to the source problems. And that Excel templates they had before for doing reports, those elaborate books, they're going to move towards Oracle's BI solution and be able to automate their reports. And the screenshot I have here is an example of selecting some reports and then scheduling them to run on a weekly basis. This is going to allow them to really automate and save a ton of time on it. So to reiterate how Bob met up to his planning needs, he implemented a project portfolio management solution and then enterprise project portfolio management to execute on it, and then the reporting and dashboards to meet the communication part of his needs. They go through this, they select the software, there's a lot of excitement. Bob gets a lot of credit. He changes his title from Director of IT to now CIO because he's moving ahead in it. And everyone's getting excited to jump the gun. And really what it parts now to is the implementation phase of the project, where the project can really be make or break the success, the investments have made. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tom Cutting, who leads our implementation practice, and he can get into the specifics about how he sees the rest of this story play out.
Thanks, Peter. Peter's kind of given you kind of the end game, right? Where are we headed with this? How did Bob identify his needs and get to that point? What I want to do is take you through kind of the implementation of that. How did he get there, right? The first part of that would be defining a roadmap, where he is, where he wants to get to. The next part would be talking about the organizational change process, making sure that that happens. Look a little bit at the development process, not in any huge detail, but to make sure that we cover some key points that some companies miss out on. Same with deliverables. Everybody's got their standard deliverable for products, but there's some key ones that get overlooked when you're doing an implementation like this. We'll also look at some roadblocks that come up, things that we saw Bob might have experienced, and then some best practices to how can we make this run smoother. So beginning with the roadmap, kind of three main points when you're setting up the roadmap. The first part is to pick out your pain points. Peter talked a little bit about Bob's needs and what he was trying to accomplish. But then once you get into the implementation, you need to set up, what are our priorities? What do we need to do first? How does that roadmap look? And that begins by identifying the pain points. And then prioritizing those, and then positioning yourself for progress throughout. Keep in mind that this is a road trip with an ultimate destination. However, you're not going to get there immediately, right? So picking your pain points. Some of the pain points that Bob would be looking at included limited capital, right? I don't have enough money to do all my projects, so which projects are the priority ones? Which ones should I look at? And OPPM, using the scorecard that Peter showed you there, helps you map out that. So what we're trying to do here is we're defining the pain points and determining, which applications are we going to put up first? How are we going to sketch this out? We can't do a big bang up front. We got to kind of lay this out so we get the groundwork right and then set us up for success in the future. So limited capital, well, we'd look at OPPM for that as a possible solution. Redundant initiatives, I've got projects out there. As Peter said about Bob, he's got might have multiple projects going on that accomplish the same thing, but because it's across multiple departments, he doesn't see that, doesn't understand that. So OPPM will certainly give you that project list of current and requested projects and be able to see that. So maybe that's where you want to head first. You can also maintain a project list in EPPM. You don't have quite the tools you have in OPPM to pick and select that, but again, we're trying to figure out what's the best path here, what's our roadmap for getting to where we want to get. Competition for resources, obviously another aspect that a lot of us face in our companies, just like Bob does with his. Do I have enough resources to accomplish all that I want to? So in addition to a resource list, I'm able to allocate resources, figure out what their capacity is, track and plan information, collect actual effort. Those are the types of things, if that's my main pain point, I'm going to look to EPPM for. Progress reporter to actually collect data back from the resources on what they've worked on. How do I know what projects people work? I know what projects they're supposed to be working on because I planned that out. But how am I supposed to know what they worked on? Well, progress reporter would help you with that. It'd also give you the estimate to complete for those, right? Another possible pain point that Bob was looking at was the complexity of his multi-project, multi-department projects across multiple areas. gone are the days where we had applications that were specific to a department, right? So EPPM gives you that effective project management, the cross-project dependencies, the consistent reporting across the organization, centralized project management information, risks and issue management, all that stuff in one location. And this is probably one of the points that's important too. Bob had this problem first of all, right? How do I solve this problem, my project management problem? Once I do that, I can start doing something with the data I get from that, but this is key to him. The OPPM side for delivery obviously has the automated processes, the online forms, the workflow associated with that, so that as I'm delivering this, I'm getting buy-off from other people. I can do that automatically through OPPM. And just generally unanswered questions, right? Am I working on the right projects? What projects am I allocating my resources to? Which projects are my priority projects? Am I spending time on my priority projects? Is there too much going on in other places? What percentage of my time is spent on maintenance projects, on facilities type things, keeping the lights on, as opposed to actually producing something of new value to the organization? EPPM certainly gives you that with the dashboards, reports, and things. So if that's the pain point you're working through, obviously EPPM is going to help you with that. OPPM is going to give you that enterprise level, the portfolio level reporting. And then P6 Analytics, the OBI side that Peter was mentioning too, gives you more customized cross-platform versatile data reporting so that you can hook this data into your financial system to get the expenses on the project, your procurement systems, find out what the commitment is, all of those other pieces that feed into this, right? Your HR system, pulling some information there as well. So that helps you answer those questions, right? Are those the types of questions you have? Well, Bob certainly had these questions. He also had a problem with the organization saying, well, what value does IT really bring to us? They're always doing something, but it never seems like they're doing what we want them to do, right? Well, OPPM helps out with that from the perspective of providing visibility into the business strategies and then aligning the IT projects with that. EPPM gives you that project monitoring and controlling so you can tell my projects are on schedule, my projects are being effectively managed. I can project when the date is, I can make adjustments to my project, all through that project management, monitoring, and controlling piece in EPPM. And then worst of all, it's those high-profile projects that are failing, right? You know, Bob gets that list every week that says, that thing we promised them a month ago, we're still struggling to get that done. So EPPM provides that better project management, visibility, risks and issues, all in one location, so they can see that and understand where that's at with current information. So once he's gone through that, once Bob's gone through that process, well, these are all of the questions I have, these are all of the pain points I'm feeling, then the key to this, building a roadmap, is to plan out those priorities and position for progress. Again, it's not a sprint. This is a long distance run. It isn't a, hey, I'm going to the shop. You're setting up, I'm going to the grocery store. It's I'm setting up this roadmap to get me to the other side of the country, right? So positioning for progress. And what Bob came up with was I need to address this project management thing first. I've got projects that are failing. I can't answer the question, what am I working on? I can't answer the question, am I working on, what I'm supposed to be working on? Those questions I can't answer. So first of all, project manager will help me get my arms around what I'm currently doing, how well I'm doing that, and understanding the current projects. Next step is resource allocation. I've got resources somewhere working on something. Well, if I start with EPPM, I can start to allocate resources to projects, not necessarily down to the detail activity, but at least at the project level, to say these individuals are working on these projects. And these individuals are way overbooked. We've got them on too many projects, so I need to figure something out about that. So that would be EPPM. the next step in the process of the roadmap here would be portfolio selection. Which projects should I undertake? OPPM helps you to build that business strategy, build a scorecard to determine which projects I want. That's what I want next on my roadmap. Resource usage, allocation up top, resource usage. My next step is going to be, are they working on what we told them to work on? Or are they being pulled off on other things, right? That usage piece of it. Financial information. Maybe I need to hook up to PeopleSoft, to the ESA bridge, in order to pull in expenses and other things. So that's Bob wanted to go that route. Right? He's got information in PeopleSoft on his commitments, on his expenses at the project level. He wants to pull that information, doesn't want to actually maintain it in EPPM, but he wants it there so he gets his full project reporting there. Then ultimately, he'd like to take that data, analyze that data better, slice and dice it, throw in some information from other sources using the OBI, the P6 analytics piece, in order to pull that information and report it graphically and concisely. So this laid out Bob's roadmap. Okay, let's start with EPPM. That's going to give me the project management. It's going to give me the resource allocation side. Let's move into the portfolio selection in EPPM and some of the other pieces. And they kind of laid out, hey, what's the next year look like? What's the next 18 months look like as far as bringing these systems up and also helping people get on board with that through the change management piece, which brings us to the organizational change management side. Right? Organizational change is key to any implementation success, but especially in something this large, where you're altering the way people manage their projects, you're altering the way people receive information about those projects, you alter the way you really do business at a lot of different levels, up to the point of reporting back to your business partners, right? Give them access to this information so they see it too. That's all part of the organizational change. Another key part to the organizational change, though, is demonstrating management involvement and commitment. Ultimately, Bob wants to become the CIO of the company. Well, that means he's got to make the current CIO look good, so he moves on to another position, right? And the way he does that is he gets that CIO interested and committed to this project so that it can be a success. So demonstrating that management involvement and commitment means that at the beginning of the project, what comes out is an overall email or other communication that says, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Here's where we want to get to. And that's all those things that are communicated through change management, right? What's the reason for change? Include the pain points. What are we trying to resolve here? What are our challenges? How does this solution help? Why did we pick this over something else? We've been using, this other software to manage our projects. Now we've got this Primavera thing. What does that mean? How does this solution work better than those? What's going to be expected of me as a project manager, as a resource on the project, as a resource manager? What are your expectations of me? What feedback mechanisms do I have? I've got ideas too. And that might be beneficial to your project, might be beneficial to do things. And so give me a mechanism to feedback that information. And then ultimately, what's in it for me, right? What are those withums? How does this help me do my job better? As a project manager, that might be a little bit more obvious, but as a resource on a project, if you're asking me to do timesheets, what's in it for me? Well, you come back with a full understanding of that when you say, we know that you're over allocated. We know that you're working on multiple projects. We just don't know how big that issue is and whether or not, 6 months from now, we're going to need to hire more people, right? So getting that in the mix helps people understand, okay, there is something in this for me. I do need to be part of this, and I need to adopt this change. So the development process, right? We've got our development process. We also work with companies like Bob to use their process to make sure that we follow their their steps to getting something into production. But what we need to remember is that we're working with a couple of different items here, right? EPPM is really the package software solution, right? It's an implementation configuration. So there's some slight differences there between building something new. It's got that predefined stuff for project management, but what we need to do is get it out there, get it implemented, and start hands-on use of it so that people can understand how it works and configure it from there. OPPM, on the other side, is more of a blank canvas, right? It's going to be more involved up front in designing how you want this thing put together. So you're going to have a bigger front end on this to lay out, what are the fields we have? How does this fit in with EPPM? What's that bridge there for the data? How does this all, what is the workflow that I want to show? What are the scorecards I want to get? What are my business objectives? All of that stuff has to be kind of defined up front and then built in. And then P6 Analytics, you're going to need data there to use P6 Analytics to see that. It's got some out-of-the-box reporting that's pretty good, but the power is that it's customized, right? You can do what you need to with it. Another key part of this whole development process and making it successful is understand what are your requirements. What do you require of your people? And as you're gathering those requirements, you're using the application to drive your implementation. How do I do it now? How will it look in the new system if we do it that way? How do we need to alter our processes to do this better? The design, well, what will it look like? Let me see it. Let me play with it. Let me understand it. That'll help me understand more how I can use this tool. To build it, pilot it as you go. That applies for both EPPM and for OPPM, right? Get some stuff out there. Let's see it. Let's make sure that it works. Make sure that we've got the right pieces. And then during the implementation process, right? If you're using pilot programs, pilot projects in the process of rolling this out and building it, well, we can migrate that data from your from your development environment into your test environment into your production environment. So the projects you started as pilots then get carried through right into production. There's not a need to reinvent things once it gets into production. So just some key ideas around the development process. Deliverables. There's standard deliverables that we do with our projects, but the ones that tend to be overlooked, the ones that are kind of shoved aside till we get further down and maybe too far down the road before they can be handled most effectively. Obviously, the organ change management plan. Lay out up front. What are the communication points we're going to use? How are we going to play that out? When do they happen? Who's in charge of those? What are they going to contain? And plan it and then execute to that. Priority list for reports. What reports are you doing now? Do you do a status report? Is that something you want to automate here? Do you have financial reports? Well, let's look what we have here. Let's build what we need to within the system. Let's collect the data that will feed those reports later. So identifying those up front is going to help. Policies and processes. Well, the policies that you have now, the process you have now, you're using a different tool. Many times it's just a matter of, okay, how do we do that in the new tool? In Bob's situation, he had a mix of policies and processes that are already defined and some that weren't. We'll look at a couple in a minute that you need to focus on as far as the tool is concerned. Roles mapping, resource mapping. What are the roles? How does that play in? How does that feed into how we're going to do our management of resources, our allocation of resources, mapping those resources to those roles. Expectations by roles. This feeds into the policies in a big way, right? What am I expecting of my project managers? That goes for what do I expect for status reporting? What do I expect for maintaining my project schedule? What do I expect of resource managers? Am I expecting them to allocate people to projects? Am I expecting the project manager to do that and the resource managers to oversee that? And those are all questions we had to ask Bob, get that in line so that we could configure the system properly, that we could make that part of the training and really bring this on board. So we don't just do kind of a generic overview of the system and generic thing, but we really drive the development, drive the training, drive the communications so that this all fits in together. And then data sourcing. Where's going to be the ultimate truth lying? What's going to be in OPPM? What's going to be in EPPM? What's going to come from our financial systems? What's going to come from our HR systems so that we have that understood and can map that out. So there's just some, obviously there's other deliverables within the project, but these are key deliverables that tend to they tend to creep up on you, right? You might not think of them up front, and then by the time you're ready to implement, there can be some holes in what you're trying to do because of these. Key process. We talked about policies and processes. These are some key ones that feed directly into the tool usage. So they're going to need to be defined so we can set those expectations with the resources on the project, and we can build the reporting, build the things out in the tool as well. Project intake. Questions like, are you going to put all project ideas into EPPM or OPPM? Are the ideas going into OPPM, but only approved projects come to EPPM? That's all part of that intake process. How do I request a project? Does that come in through the system as well? Estimating and budgeting. At what level are we doing that within the tool? Is that done outside the tool? Is it handed to us and we just put it in the tool? Do we build bottoms up to do that within EPPM? How is scope change managed, right? What's the baseline? How often do I baseline? What's my comparison to my baseline? Resource management, we already talked about that with the resource manager. Assigns, allocates to projects, or do project managers do that, and resource managers just oversee it. Project tracking, status reporting, all of those key processes need to be in place and defined as to how the tool is going to assist in that, right? Very key to the success of the project. And what are some of the roadblocks we've run into? XYZ has a long procurement process. So if we waited until we came on board, even if it was day one, right, there's going to be maybe a 30-day, 60-day window in which, first of all, you have to get approval for it, and then you have to put in the order, and then it takes longer than expected to come for the hardware to come from the vendor. And then, it's just one thing after another, and pretty soon you're 3 months into the project, and you still don't have your hardware, right? So that's always a big roadblock. Lack of execution of an organizational change management plan. You put it all on paper, but if you don't put somebody in charge of delivering on that, then it becomes just a piece of paper, and you get to the time to roll out the project, and nobody knows what's expected of them. Some of them don't even know what's coming. It's just not pretty at that point. Delayed decision making. If you go over and over and over your processes to the point where nobody's willing to finally say, yes, that's what I want. You're putting a workflow together in OPPM, and it takes 3 months to decide, who's going to act on which part of that workflow. That's a lot of delay on your project. And then not involving the right people first. Right? You got to get those involved up front in order to make that successful. What are some of the best practices that we've seen? Well, certainly you want to avoid fighting fires. And one of the ways of doing that is to begin with the end in mind. And that's so true throughout, right? That's why the roadmap up front. But it's even more than that, right? It's when you get to the point of what reports are we going to do? Well, begin with the end in mind. if I identify those reports up front, that's going to help me drive my data collection. Promote hands-on throughout. So that means at the beginning of the project, when you're going through the design, have a system there that you can play with and see and show, rather than just screenshots of somebody else's system. As you're going through, the build of it, maybe you start with a pilot project near the beginning and just carry that through. Don't wait till the end to kind of show people what's there and what you're doing. We have a sandbox on our Atlantic site that we give people access to pretty much as soon, sometimes even before we start a project with them. And what that allows them to do is, again, that hands-on piece, get a feel for it, get this understanding of that, how they would use it, how it looks, what they can see. Then push ownership early, right? Make sure that people understand that this is going to be their system, and we want them to own that when we're done. As consultants, our job is not to hang on for the next 20 years and make sure that you continue to use the system. Our job is to get in, stand it up, but leave it in a state that you are fully capable, fully understand what you have, how to use it, how to make it work, how to solve problems, and become self-sufficient on that. So pushing ownership early is going to help with that. And then also, we found that if you send, because we do a lot of the initial setup with the structure, with the enterprise project structure, with the OBS and some of those other pieces, the people who are going to take over the admin role on it don't necessarily see the build of that. They see the result of it. And in some respects, they miss out on some of that that background stuff. So when we come in, we help to get them up to speed on that, certainly give them the documentation, build the admin documentation that they need to continue using it. But it's such a big project, it's such a big product, all of these products are, that it helps to have that grounding, that training for that. So we'd encourage that as well. So that kind of wraps up the implementation side of this. Obviously, we started with the roadmap, looked at those pain points and identified, hey, what's the priority there? EPPM, then OPPM, then progress reporter, and then into the other OBI, P6 analytics piece. We talked through the organizational change, the importance of that. We looked at deliverables, the process, the roadblocks, and some best practices. So I'm going to turn it now back over to Peter.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, at this point, we are opening up for questions. You can feel free to type them into the chat box there. I believe Troy Wyatt, our CEO, is handling some of the questions. Troy, what questions do we have so far that have come in?
We have two, Tom. One is how customers typically handle workflow and define that from either from the PMO or handling in the project management structure. And the other one deals with integration with ERP and working with other Oracle products, how we've seen customers, at what point do they integrate with their ERP system.
Tom, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, can you ask the first one again?
Yeah, it's about the integration of workflow within the portfolio application and how that works with the EPPM product.
Sure. The workflow within the OPPM system is very obviously very configurable. You're basically building it, and basically through that workflow, you can collect information about the project, not just about the workflow, but using some of the online forms. One of the big ones that are useful, we set up a project request form, right? And so somebody who doesn't even have to have a license to OPPM, they can pull up a window, go to a website, and it collects a little bit of information. They hit submit. It triggers an email to the PPM, the the PMO, the project management office, and then they take a look at it and say, oh, okay, we need to either set up a project or kick off the project initiation phase in order to do this. And then when they get that enough information gathered there, they push a button and it actually will go over to EPPM and create a project. That's one example of that flow. The data does get published between the two systems. So I've got fields within OPPM that I want to maintain there, that I want to push over to EPPM. I can do that. If I've got fields in EPPM that are good for dashboards or scorecards on the OPPM side, I can send that data over there. So there's a lot of interaction there, specifically at the data level that collects it in the workflow and then passes that over to the EPPM. Hopefully that answers that question. And then the second question was?
Yeah, what time is it typically appropriate, or what have we seen with customers when the ERP integration happens, either to Oracle products or other finance and HR systems for costs and for resources? You know, what time is that? When is that appropriate in the project?
I guess obviously it depends on what your pain point is first, right? We talked a little bit about that. If the financial piece is a big aspect of your pain, then by all means make it part of the initial stuff. You know, some of the other pieces might have to be, put in order based on the priority. But if you've got the data there in one system and you want to bring it over into the other, then that bridge is going to make that effective. Just trying to think if there's any specific time that's better than others. I guess it really kind of depends on obviously your pain point, obviously whether you have the data there or not, and your ability to get that hooked up. Early is good. If you need to establish projects in the system first, establish the process of doing things, you may want to postpone it, but I don't see any specific time external to the company's needs that really drives that. That makes sense, Troy? Am I oversimplifying that?
Yeah, I think that, Tom, you said it, right? All projects are different, and it really does come down to the level of details in reporting. I think we've found that customers that bring up the portfolio and the EPPM applications together typically have a need for that, the project creation and intake, which flows back to cost, right? And the accounting principles of it from the finance system, as well as being able to provide, the resource level management that you get out of the HR systems.
Okay, great. This is Peter, guys. We're coming up just about on our time limit. Troy, is there one more question we can squeak in?
Yes. How have we found the integration with ERP systems with Oracle's tools such as the ESAs and the PIPs out there?
Is that question to me?
Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
I would say I've worked with a couple of them. One with the PeopleSoft ESA, and then the other was with the J.D. Edwards PIP. My impression of them, the ESA with the PeopleSoft is certainly much more menu-driven and configurable. The PIP side on J.D. Edwards tended to be a little more rigid, but that's just kind of my impression of those two.
Yeah, and I think Oracle's done a really good job about creating a better mechanism for the connections. The ESA is leaps and bounds, the web services that are available to be able to make those connections to not only Oracle products, but to other applications, finance and HR, and just data stores that are out there. Oracle's done a very good job on that side. I think the PIP is the first part of it, and it's got challenges, though there are ways to make it work, I think is a fair statement.
And I would also add to that, if there's, there's always the web services, right, that you were just mentioned, that allows you to customize things that, for the smaller type implementations where you don't have maybe a full J.D. Edwards system or a full PeopleSoft system. Databases are databases, especially if they're all Oracle-based. Web services are easy to pull that information in to different applications. So it's very possible to do that even outside of the standard PIP and ESA type stuff for smaller implementations.
Okay, great. Troy, why don't we postpone any questions? If anyone has any you can feel free to contact us at the webinar feedback or through our website, or individually contact us with questions regarding this, and we'll be sure to answer that. Other than that, I want to thank everyone for being on the webinar so far, and we look forward to presenting to you in the future. So, thank you, everyone.